Sometimes there's a very big difference between the United States getting fingered for the fall of Afghanistan and just poo-pooing American investments. That is not happening. Look at the yield on a 10-year Treasury now through all the bedlam at the Kabul International Airport and shutting it down, trying to deal with thousands, trying to get the hell out. A lot of money has been pouring into our bond market as it has our dollar, a reflection that when things hit the fan, people hit the securities, Treasury, government-backed securities, including our currency of the United States. It is happening again. What to make of that with David Nicholas Wealth Management CEO. I don't want to overemphasize that, Nicholas, because this doesn't apply universally to stocks. But, stocks are kind of holding their own in this. And you would think, telegraphed as this was, that's remarkable. What do you think?
Well, Neil, this is certainly a defining moment for U.S. foreign policy. And, I think it got potentially huge impacts for the global order. I mean, if you just take Afghanistan isolated by itself, I don't think that's enough to derail U.S. markets or the economy. But the rest of the world is watching how America reacts in this moment. And if this somewhat leads to instability in other areas around the world, namely China, Russia, Iran, that's really where I think we could see a chain of events that could lead to negatively impacting the U.S. consumer. Because really, this is all about how does the U.S. consumer respond to the events that's happening. You saw some of the U.S. consumer reports this morning didn't look great. We saw the New York Fed manufacturing index that came out today, one of the lowest on records. So I think ultimately Afghanistan by itself, not going to be a real issue for U.S. markets. But if this progresses into something worse globally, that's where I think the U.S. consumer will start to be affected. And we could see a slowdown in really just overall spending going through the rest of the year.
Interesting. So this might be more reflection on that fear than any sort of flight to quality in light of what's going on in Afghanistan. And that is an interesting point, because if you think about it, China just released some retail sales data that shows it's getting hit hard there. It's at very, very low levels, barely moving at about 4%. You could make the argument as China goes, so goes that region, so goes the recovery that we had been betting on. Where are you on this?
Yeah, I agree, Neil. And obviously the Delta variant has kind of hit both here domestically and globally. So there's question marks on, is this a temporary slowdown for global markets, or is this something bigger that's going to continue into the fall, into the new year? We also have the inflation concerns. But I also think the Fed is really, I think, one of the biggest issues that will affect markets in the next quarter. I mean, there's a lot of support at the Feds for tapering. They could push it to November. But I think when you add all of that together, slowdown in China that you mentioned, you have the potential for Fed tapering. You've got the Delta variant. I mean, this is ultimately about the U.S. consumer and how they're going to react. I mentioned that earlier, but it doesn't bode well for sentiment, in my opinion, in the short term.
When you look at the environment, the backdrop here, Afghanistan notwithstanding, it is having a reverberating effect on President Biden, and many Democrats, for example, are very worried. I know we tend to eschew politics, as we should, but if you'll just indulge me here, that it is going to hurt his negotiating stance on some of these things he wants to push through, like not only the infrastructure package itself, but that $3.5 trillion human infrastructure plan, his push to address climate change, the electric vehicle push, all of that could be sort of, on tenterhooks here in light of what has been unleashed in Afghanistan. What do you think of that?
Neil, that's an excellent point. I mean, the question is, has President Biden's brand been damaged this week? I think the answer to that is emphatically yes. I mean, if you look at where the president stood a week ago at this time, overall, he was having a good week. It was the rollout of the infrastructure bill last week. There was a lot of momentum, excitement. You had Republicans and Democrats working together to pass this bill. We hadn't seen that in a very long time. It's amazing what a week of difference can make for the White House. And so I agree. I think the president's going to have a much harder time pushing their agenda, because as those popularity numbers decline, if that gets under 50%, I think the administration is going to be playing defense and going to be reactive going into the rest of the year versus coming from a position of strength. So I don't know. I think it does impact their ability to push policy throughout the rest of the year.
So much we don't know, but we're on top of it, as are you, David. Excellent job. I appreciate you coming by. David Nicholas Wealth Management CEO.